the pillar of mercy, or you can go up the central column, which is the pillar of harmony or the pillar of balance. And going up the middle is the shortest way to get to God, but it's also the hardest, right? You can think of this as um, how you might go, the pillar of severity might be somebody that goes to become a Zen monk and go live in a cave in the woods, right? And find God through just denial and difficulties. Whereas the pillar of mercy might be somebody that goes more the tantric route, right? That tries to learn to utilize sexual energy to have these divine experiences, right? And let me tell you, I mean, taking the sexual route is quite often a lot easier than living in a cave. And then there's the balance, the way of balance, which is probably ideal. That sometimes it's denial, sometimes it's sensuality, right? A lot of ways to climb the mountain. Now, the four worlds are olams are represented by Hokmah, Bina, and Tifereth, and the Sephira around it in Malkut. Okay, that probably didn't make any sense to you, but to some of you, you're all like, oh yeah, olams, dig it, and other people are like, what is he talking about? It's Hebrew. I'm just giving you an overview. We're gonna keep moving, right? And then the three triangles that you can see. Remember, I told you there was an upturned triangle and two downturned triangles. They're also given names, and they're also entire universes. See, what I want you to take from this is that there's quite a lot of information contained in what seems to be a very simple picture. And each of these Sephiroth has different attributions. There's different ways you can apply it to astrology, to colors, to gemstones, to fragrances, animals, plants. Knowing things like that is not really necessary to what we're trying to accomplish. But as long as you understand that there is a correspondence between the tree of life and the tarot, the tree of life and the runes, the tree of life and the I Ching, the tree of life and the chakras, that you start to see these same ideas present again and again all over the world. That there's these certain high functioning laws, which is why I began with the seven universal laws in episode one, because I wanted to give you a foundation under which you can interpret all these other things. Starting to make sense now, isn't it? Yeah. I got a plan, baby. But it's the law of correspondence is such that everything is interconnected. Quantum physics is telling us everything is interconnected. The tree of life is telling us that everything is interconnected. Now, you can look at this diagram and it shows you how it is that all of creation came into being. Okay? So imagine, if you will, that you're God, that you've decided you want to make creation, and you're just chilling being God in the all infinite totality. And you're like, all right, it's time for me to make a creation. But there's no room for you to make creation because all there is you, right? You're God, you're everywhere. What are you going to do? So the very first thing that was created is the reflection, right? The very first thing that's created is what God is not. So the first thing is Keter, the crown, and the very first thing that was created was, let me get it in Hebrew for you, Hokmah, because I do this in English. Hokmah, wisdom, was the very first thing created. The Father was the first thing that came to be, right? So the first thing that is created is the reflection of God. Then if you have something in its reflection, then what's the very first thing that you know? What's the very first thing that becomes apparent? That the thing and its reflection are not the same. Does that make sense? You've got the thing, its reflection, and the knowledge that the thing and the reflection are not the same thing. And this was Bina, understanding. That's the mother, right? That's the mother. So you've got 0, 1, and 2, right? Keter, which is God in totality, creates God who is the Father, and out of that is created God who is the mother, right? In this division of God into three parts, it's very common. We talked about this, right? It's Father, Son, Holy Spirit, Mother, Father, God, Shiva, Vishnu, Brahma. There's a reason, because across time, people have been paying attention and observing and trying to connect with their creator. And the conclusion they keep reaching again and again and again is God that comes from 0 and then becomes 1 and becomes 2. that make sense? If you know anything about computers, what's the language of computers? Binary, ones and zeros. What's the language in our DNA? Binary, right? That out of nothing comes two things, right? All of reality can be boiled down to that. Now, don't you think it's significant that Jewish mystics thousands of years ago arrived at the exact same conclusions that we're finding in our own DNA today? Doesn't that strike you as significant? I don't know. Maybe it's just me. So, out of this first group of God, then God the Father and God the Mother, which is that upturned triangle that I mentioned, the whole point behind this was God's like, I'm ready to create creation. So what's the first thing they do is they repeat this process. And that's the downturned triangle, the first downturned triangle, which is mercy, severity, and beauty. Now think about that. God's like, I'm going to make everything. And after God basically arrives at, hey, I'm God and here I am, the very first thing that gets created is mercy. It's mercy. We're talking about these disasters, right? Everybody's, ooh, God is a vengeful God, and the hammer, and he puts it down. But what was the very first thing that God brought into existence was mercy. Okay? Then the very next thing is severity. Now you can think of severity as discipline, right? But it's basically God created the capacity to love you and love you through things before God even created the capacity for discipline. And then the next thing is beauty. You combine mercy with discipline and you get beauty. Does that make sense? That you combine compassion and intensity, and out of that arrives beauty. Look at the natural world. Look at the way things are and the way things come up and the way things exist. The natural world's full contact, like pretty much all the time. Like it's going down all around you all the time. Things are growing and dying. Things are eating things and giving birth to other things that go on to eat or get eaten. But it's constantly growing forward and constantly evolving out of this process. So after mercy, severity, and beauty came into being, the cycle repeated again and became victory, glory, or our intellect, and then the foundation, or the libido. So what comes next? Victory, winning, right? Glory and intellect, and quite frankly, sex were the next things that were created, right? And this applies across all of creation, right? But if you think about it, it took mercy, discipline, and beauty to exist before victory could even be perceived. Because what were you winning over? Does that make sense? And then out of that, glory, intellect. The fact that it can be glorious to comprehend and perceive and apply these higher realities. Okay? And out of the intellect comes the foundation. Out of the intellect comes the libido. Out of the intellect comes the emotions, right? That it is supposed to be our minds and our wills that guide us, and not our feelings and our impulses. Does that make sense? That your intellect is your glory, which is over the foundation of your emotional, animalistic nature. And then all of that comes down into 10, the kingdom, or Malkut, the physical world. And this is true of all of us. All of these things, all of these forces, all of these concepts distilled down into where we are, right? Now here's where it gets complex. Yeah, I know you're like, man, it was already complex. Okay, here's where it gets slightly more complex, right? Beyond Keter, beyond the crown, the very top thing, the God in totality, there's actually three more divisions. There is the Ain, which means nothing. But it's not nothing, it means no thing. It's no thingness. Like you hear this idea, especially a lot in Zen Buddhism and some other things, that don't necessarily believe that God is around and you can kind of talk to him and be like, oh, hey, God, and God will be like, oh, hey, back, right? It's that when you get into describing what God is, it becomes difficult, because if you describe what God is, you're at the same time not accounting for what God is not. Does that make sense? If you say that God is male, you're saying God is not female, and you can't say that if you believe that God is everything. If you say that God is love, then at the same time you're saying that God is never not love, right? And so it becomes difficult to place any sort of limitations or restrictions on something that by definition is everything, right? God is everything. And by the reality of the fact that God is everything, then God is no thing. Does that make sense? So out of the nothing, out of the no thing, came the Ein Sof, the without limit. Since if there's everything in totality, then there's no limits. And out of the Ein Sof, which is no limits, came the Ein Sof Or, the limitless light. No thing gives rise to no limits, which gives rise to limitless light, which gives rise to the Creator. Now, it might be kind of like mind-boggling to think of like, wow, how can there be something beyond God? And I don't have an easy logical answer for you, because we're moving into the realm of not logic. But it's interesting now that science is starting to tell us things like there's not just one universe, there's lots of universes. There's not just one dimension, there's lots of dimensions. There's not just one you, there's lots of yous everywhere across time. And if there's lots of dimensions, then there's got to be lots of different gods, and lots of different gods over these different universes. But who do they answer to? Personally, since the law of correspondence has taught me that as above, so below, that everything that happens on this plane is a reflection of what's happening on higher planes, that there must be one God who's over everything somewhere. And I can't say anything at all about like what that God is like, because that's like mind-boggling. Like God exists outside of the universe. But it's kind of interesting when you start looking at some of like the creation stories and things of that nature, when you think of a God who can be both in the universe, or at least God's reflection is in the universe, and God in totality is outside of the universe. It's kind of mind-blowing, right? You know, I was going to say a little bit more about this, but I think that's pretty good, because how can I follow up with something like that, right? But this stuff applies on many levels. When you see this tree of life image, if you look at things like the chakras, the energy centers in our body, where energy accumulates and flows through our body actually lines up 100% with the tree of life. And these were ideas that were arrived at vastly different places in vastly different times. Think about that. Do you think it's any coincidence that we were told, hey, here's a map for the entire universe, here's a map for all of creation, and oh, hey, by the way, this exact map, this exact model of creation is built into your very body? It's interesting. See, this is how I don't think you can really learn about these type of things and these type of realities in any detail at all, and dismiss it as coincidence, and dismiss it as just random ideas, or even worse, dismiss it as nonsense, since effectiveness is the measure of truth. It works. It works. And because it works is why people keep realizing it, and why people keep discovering it across time, right? Now, because I think I did at least a halfway decent job of explaining this, I'm going to do something that I've wanted to do since week one. I'm going to play a very important song for you, and I'm going to tell you who and what it is after the song is over. So this is kind of my victory song about having explained the tree of life, hopefully in at least moderately comprehensive way, or something that you can understand, and it'll make more sense after you see the picture. Like, you can get this recording off my Facebook fan page, facebook.com/B-Dave-Walters. And then once you have this image in front of you, listen to the recording and it'll make a whole lot more sense. But hopefully at least the idea is going there. So here's something special, and I will tell you after I play it who and what it was. Okay, I'm going to stop this, break it up. I'm not even going to say on here what it is, because some of you watch the video while you're listening to radio broadcast, so I'm not going to tell you what it is. When we come back, I'll tell you what the song was.